Greetings and salutations, everyone. We are going to talk about Chapter 12 in this lecture, which covers gram-positive cocci. And so we're going to compare and contrast the different forms of gram-positive cocci, talk about staphylococcal and streptococcal pathogens and the diseases that they cause, and then we'll finish up with a discussion about the morphological characteristics of Viridian's group and Enterococci. Most species of Staphylococcus are facultative anaerobes. And so what that means is that they can grow in both environments that have oxygen and do not have oxygen. They're like the meh, we don't care, right? If we have oxygen or not. And so that means that they can grow on the surface of our skin, but they can also grow deep in the tissue and form abscesses as well. And so in this chapter, we're going to be looking at the staphylococci bacteria or gram-positive cocci, bacteria that are most commonly associated with surgical site infections and healthcare-associated infections. Some common ones are the Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, Viridian's group, and Enterococcus. And so first we're going to concentrate on Staphylococcus. And so Staphylococcus is the most common species of gram-positive facultative anaerobic organisms, and staphylo comes from the Greek word meaning cluster of grapes, and kokos from the word meaning round berry. So it is a round-shaped bacteria, if you remember, and it can come by itself, singly or doubly as Diplococcus, in a strip or a chain like Streptococcus, or in a cluster or group like Staphylococcus. And so Staphylococcus, again, there's two particular types of organisms frequently responsible for surgical site infections in regards to Staphylococcus, and that is Staphylococcus aureus and Staphylococcus epidermidis. So we're going to talk about both of those. And they do stain differently when we put them on a blood agar plate, or they appear different colors rather as they metabolize the blood agar. Staphylococcus is going to appear yellow, and Staphylococcus aureus will appear yellow, and Staphylococcus epidermidis is going to appear white or without color. And so Staphylococcus aureus can live on the skin or in the pores of the skin. It also colonizes in the nasal passages of 15 to 40% of individuals. And that's why it's so important for us to cover our nose when we wear our mask. Staphylococcus is opportunistic, so it lives on our skin and it doesn't really harm us unless it's given an opportunity. And in surgery, more than likely, it's going to be given an opportunity. It has the ability to resist low moisture environments, temperature extremes, high salt content of the skin, and can rapidly multiply in moist areas such as the mucous membranes of the nose, the axilla, or in the axilla as well, and around the anus. Some factors that make it more virulent. First of all, it has surface proteins that enhance its colonization. It also produces invasins like leukocidin, hyaluronidase, and kinase. It also has a capsule that helps to protect it against phagocytosis. It is catalase positive and coagulase positive, and it also secretes toxins which assist it in lysing human cell walls. It is also acquired antibiotic resistance, and that's where we get MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And it is most commonly charged with causing superficial skin infections, food poisoning, respiratory disease, bloodstream infections, post-op surgical site infections, And in individuals that have an intact immune system and intact skin and all of those things, it's cool. It doesn't harm us. But when the reverse happens, when there's a wound, when we have immunocompromised situation, then that is when it's going to become more virulent and attack. And when we suture up a wound, if we introduce this Staph aureus into the we're going to drag it through the skin. It's going to be pulled through the tissue, and if it is has Staphylococcus aureus on it, then it could cause a surgical site infection. And this is one downside to using multi-filament sutures as a running stitch, because it serves as like a tract where the bacteria can move along it through something called a wicking action. If you think of how a wick works, multi-filament suture works in the same way. Now on to Staphylococcus epidermidis, which grows white in color in that blood agar plate, and you can see it here, the yellow Staph aureus, and where it's still kind of pinkish is the Staph epidermidis. And like the name suggests, it lives on the skin. It can also be found in and around the eye or ear and mouth. It's a commensal organism, so it's part of our normal flora of the nose. And it is a frequent cause of IV catheter, urinary, and prosthetic device infections, as well as acute bacterial endocarditis when there is some sort of intracardiac prosthesis that's implanted, like a heart valve or something of the sort. Now, Staph epidermidis produces an extracellular substance that is a sugary substance that helps it form the biofilm. And this biofilm is really great at adhering to catheters, any types of shunts that we put in, and also artificial joints. And with artificial joints, if we have some sort of infection in there, and we have to take it out and put in another one, there is a very high reoccurrence rate of infections once it does become infected, and that could result in a permanent fusion of the joint. Staphylococcus lugdunensis is believed to be part of the normal skin microflora of the human perineal region. It was first identified in 1988, and although it is virulent, it is relatively uncommon and can be associated with toxic shock syndrome, osteomyelitis, septic arthritis, endophthalmitis, which is of the eye, and endocarditis, and it is considered coagulase negative. Staphylococcal diseases include folliculitis, furunculosis, carbuncles, impetigo, scalded skin syndrome, food poisoning, toxic shock syndrome, osteomyelitis, and also endocarditis. Now, folliculitis, furunculosis, and carbuncles are all, and impetigo are all situations that occur on the skin. There's some sort of lesion or pustule or something like that. Scalded skin syndrome, it is recognized by the peeling of the skin and the epidermis layer. Food poisoning. Staphylococcus food poisoning is the most frequently reported in the United States, and the strains of Staph aureus that cause it are those that produce heat-resistant protein that is an enterotoxin that causes the poisoning. Now, toxic shock syndrome is caused by a strain of Staph aureus that produces a specific exotoxin called toxic shock syndrome associated toxin. And this, the first case was diagnosed in 1978 and it was found that menstruating women who use super absorbent vaginal tampons that left them in for a prolonged period of time would allow the bacteria to proliferate and produce that toxin, and eventually could lead to toxic shock syndrome. Now, osteomyelitis is a chronic bone marrow and bone infection, and quite often see this in the toes, but the book does talk about the bones of long children, the long bones of children, and those that have a weakened immune system, of course, kind of back to that, and we could diagnose that with x-ray. And then infective endocarditis, again, is attributed to the heart valve replacement, and if left untreated, can be fatal. And for my visual learners, here are some images of some staphylococcal diseases. This first one, this is a pustule. Staph aureus is the culprit. Then we have a carbuncle, Staph aureus again. Here, impetigo, which can be caused by Staph aureus and Staph pyogenes. This bottom one here, bottom middle, osteomyelitis caused by Staph aureus. And lastly, scalded skin syndrome, Staph aureus. Streptococcus is similar to Staphylococcus in that it is gram-positive, and they are facultative anaerobes, and they're found in many tissues of the human body. Some other characteristics include that they're non-motile, they do not form spores, and they typically occur in pairs or chains. They are also classified as catalase negative. Now they're divided into broad classes based on their ability to lyse red blood cells, so their hemolytic properties. We also look at their morphology and their biochemical reactions. And they're classified into three broad groups, including alpha, beta, and gamma. Now, alpha are the cells that destroy some erythrocytes, where betas are much more destructive, and then the gamma group are considered non-hemolytic. So group A, Streptococcus, it has a lot of virulent factors, including its ability to produce a variety of kinases that can dissolve blood clots, destroy phagocytes, destroy those attachments, connective attachments of cells. They also can have a polysaccharide capsule, which prevents destruction by phagocytosis. When we're talking about diseases, they can range anywhere from mild or non-invasive to very severe or invasive and chronic. Some non-invasive ones are strep throat, scarlet fever, and impetigo. Severe acute invasive diseases include necrotizing fasciitis, pneumococcal pneumonia, streptococcal meningitis, bacteremia, streptococcal toxic shock syndrome, cellulitis, and puerperal sepsis. And chronic diseases include rheumatic fever and glomerulonephritis. Group B streptococci are normally found in the vagina, but they can transfer to the infant during vaginal delivery, so that is typically monitored. And the way that we diagnose these strep infections is similar to, diagnosing other bacterial diseases, which is through culture and serology. Now we're going to play a little game called Who Am I? And so this first one is, what is this streptococcal pathogen? This streptococcal pathogen is an opportunistic pathogen that's located in the eye, ear, mouth, and nose, and most predominantly in the upper respiratory tract. These cells are round and they occur in pairs. It is one of 3 most common causes of bacterial meningitis. It also kills approximately 1.6 million people each year, with half of those deaths being in children younger than 5 years of age. Those that are at highest risk are children younger than 2 and adults older than 65. Is also transmitted in daycares and adult nursing homes and long-term care facilities. It can run rampant there. Also, adults with chronic conditions such as asthma, diabetes, heart, liver, or lung disease are also at a higher risk. Who is it? If you guessed Streptococcus pneumoniae, you would be right. As mentioned previously, Streptococcus pneumoniae is responsible for many of the ear infections that we see. And so this streptococcal disease results in an ear infection. It occurs from direct contact with a carrier, and as a result, these individuals may need a myringotomy. And a myringotomy is performed to alleviate chronic inflammation in the ear and to allow the fluid to drain out that is in the middle ear. Do you know the name of this disease? It is otitis media. This pneumococcal disease is a disease of the brain and spinal cord. And the 3 major causes of this disease are Haemophilus influenza, Neisseria meningitidis, and Streptococcus pneumoniae. Symptoms start out like a cold but can progress to severe headaches, fever, pain, stiffness in the neck and back, confusion, restlessness, dizziness, convulsions, and can ultimately lead to a coma and death. Approximately 20% of patients die, and 25 to 50% will suffer severe central nervous system complications like brain damage, seizures, hydrocephalus, subdural effusion, and hearing loss. Name this disease. If you guessed pneumococcal meningitis, you would be correct. Let's see if you can name this streptococcal pathogen from these clues. This pathogen causes strep throat, rheumatic fever, scarlet fever, and necrotizing fasciitis. It also has the ability to break down the hyaluronidase that allows for the cells of our tissues to stick together. It also produces other exotoxins that can lead to scarlet fever and systemic toxic shock syndrome, and other enzymes like the streptokinase and streptodornase and hyaluronidase. It is the cause of puerperal fever, and between 1918 and 1919, it is believed that the secondary infections caused by this pathogen were responsible for up to 90% of the deaths of infected soldiers. This pathogen has also experienced a resurgence in attention due to its ability to colonize rapidly, multiply, and spread in the host while evading the immune system. What say you? If you guessed Streptococcus pyogenes, you are correct. Let's see if you can determine what this streptococcal pathogen is by these clues. This pathogen is better known as group B streptococcus, or GBS. It is a normal part of the flora of the vagina, the GI tract, and the upper respiratory system. It is also responsible for causing disease in neonates when they are exposed to amniotic membrane rupture for a long period of time. So after the water breaks, if baby is in there for a long time, then that could increase their chance of getting a disease or an infection by this pathogen. There are two types associated with this pathogen, which are early onset and late onset, two types of diseases, and it is pretty rare in healthy adults. Are you ready to guess? If you said Streptococcus agalactiae, you are correct. Can you name these streptococci? They are also referred to as gamma hemolytic, and they demonstrate a lack of hemolysis on blood agar plates, and so they're going to appear green on the plate. They also kind of have like this donut-like appearance, and their colonies can appear dome-shaped. There are 6 major species that are included in this group, and they are S. mutans, S. salivarius, S. anguinosus, S. mitis, S. sanguinis, and S. bovis. Now, S. mutans are most commonly known as commensals in the human mouth. And when we have dental procedures or something like that, if they're the ones that are going to kind of wreak havoc in the mouth when they get an opportunity, those would be the ones. Can you guess what it is? If you guessed Viridian's group, you would be correct. We're coming into the home stretch here. And we have one more group of streptococci. Can you name it from these clues? Now, this group of streptococci was initially called Group D, but there are 17 species collectively, and they have been reclassified as this type of streptococci. Now, they are gram-positive facultative, same as the rest. They're either A hemolytic or Y hemolytic, so they do break down some red blood cells, and then other strains do not. The two most common are Faecalis and Faecium, and they are the most prevalent species cultured from humans. They have, the scary thing about these is that they have numerous intrinsic antibiotic resistance mechanisms, and they are really, really good at acquiring new resistant genes or mutations via conjugation. And the Faecium strain is responsible for the majority of VRE infections, or vancomycin, which is an antibiotic resistant strains. And they are a serious class of healthcare associated infections. So as an opportunistic pathogen, they are commensals in the GI tract, and they're responsible for causing UTIs, intra-abdominal infections, bacteremia that can result in meningitis and endocarditis. What is it? If you said enterococci, you would be absolutely correct. So this is going to conclude our discussion regarding gram-positive cocci. I hoped that you found it helpful and interesting, and you were amazed, and now you love microbiology.